Today, I want to talk about a topic that is a very uncomfortable topic. And you're probably going to find me laughing. And this is not a laugh of, haha, this is funny. It'll be my laugh of shame and embarrassment. Whenever I laugh, it's usually because I don't want to be talking about this right now. And this is a subject I don't really want to be talking about, but I'm doing it because a lot of people need help and I want to bring it to them in a real way. I don't want to just bring in the Bible. I don't want to bring in science. I just want to bring in uh, reality, what we all go through. So, pornography, I struggled with it. It's not so much that I struggle with pornography, I struggled with masturbation because now I don't know if any people actually like look at pornography and don't masturbate, but I don't know why you would have one without the other. If anything, I could see maybe masturbation without pornography, but that would be about it because that's what it would have been back in the day, back before there was an internet or before there used to be pornographic magazines. But myself, there would be no way I'd ever walk into any grocery store. Well, I guess whatever store would sell it, usually gas stations sell pornography magazines. I would never ever dare buy one because what if somebody seen me and told my parents or confronted me about it because it was a shameful thing. Pornography used to be absolutely shameful, and you'd be absolutely ashamed to be caught looking at it. And still, for anybody who's probably watching this video, probably still the same for them today. Because we have consciences. Unless our consciences have been seared by an evil conscience, our conscience speaks to us and says, hey, these things aren't right. Even the world knows it. We have ratings for movies, PG, PG 13, rated R, G, E, right? E for everyone. Then you have G, general audiences. So if it's not an E, it's a G. And if you look at a G or a PG, even a man with his shirt off is considered not right. Whoa, we go to a beach today. What happens? That is not G. Or that might be a G rated. I don't even know if it's G rated. I think in PG it might still be PG. It's not for everyone. So I want to talk about this in a real way. I'm going to go through my experiences. I'm going to go through the hardest parts about this you can imagine. Well, almost as you can imagine. I never got into absolute depravity and just utter evil with these things. But I did think on some of these evils that are definitely evils in the Bible with some of these things. So I often hear people say they sin every day. And for years, I'm like, how can people say they sin every day? They sin every day. How can somebody sin every day? And then it brought me back to this time when I used to do things like this. And I'm like, that's how people can sin every day. When you're hooked on this, you're hooked. It's like a drug. It does the same thing to your body that drugs do, right? Whenever you're masturbating, you have that 15, 20, 30-second oomph of up for a man. I don't know how long it lasts for women all the time. And then you come down. And it's like a drug. And while it might be pleasurable for the first few hours, afterwards, there's usually never pleasure. But we're going to go and we're going to explain this and we're going to go in depth through all this uh, and see, why do we do these things? Why do we actually do this? Why are we hooked on it? I often think about the time with David with Bathsheba. A lot of people look at David and go, oh, 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 look at David, look at David, look at David. And yes, while what he did was wrong, we can look at David and go, oh, he committed adultery and he murdered. Let me ask you something. Do you think that he was already walking down that road towards adultery before he did it? Or did he just went from, I'm a godly man, to boom, there's a woman, I can't control myself, I need her right now? Of course, he walked down that road. The Bible tells us by beholding we become changed, right? We're supposed to become changed into the image of Christ. So while we behold the image of Christ and the Bible, we become like Christ and we become like the Bible and we fulfill the things of the Bible and we don't fulfill the things of the flesh. So here I'm doing a topic on the things that are not like Christ. And it may, sometimes I struggle. I'm like, in heaven, we won't have these talks. It'll be really nice. But in order for somebody to be able to overcome this sin, they need to understand why they're doing it. The deep set roots of what actually has us in these bounds, that has us a chain, right? It's a chain of sin that has us bound to Satan. So when David went in with unto Bathsheba, he was already a married man. He already had a wife. And here is one of the first problems that we have. Why did David marry Michal? Because Saul promised this woman to him, right? Saul promised his daughter, and then he didn't get the daughter, the first daughter that he's promised, and then he ended up getting Michal for 100 foreskins, right? It was due to pride, it was due to having a wife. But did David ever consult God as to who he should be marrying? No. So let's find a Bible verse that first speaks of this departure from the faith that leads into sin. In Genesis 4, verse 6, it says, "There was giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." So here in this verse, it talks about giants in the land. And then it says, "and also after that." So it's saying after there were giants. So there's no more giants in the land anymore. You have the sons of God. So the sons of God came from the giants in the land. So when Adam and Eve were created, they were created in the full stature of a man. They would have been like giants. And as sin came along, we got smaller, we got weaker, and we don't live as long. Just a natural thing that happens. So all of a sudden you have the sons of God, they go in unto the daughters of men. Now these sons of God still would have been maybe not giants anymore, but still of strong physical bearing. And they went in unto the daughters of men, and then they bare children which were men of renown. So you have all these sons of God going into the daughters of men. Now, a lot of these women might have been converted, right? But the question is were they all? No, they went in unto the daughters of men because this is God saying, hey, these are not the people who I chose for you. You are not supposed to be unevenly yoked. So we know this because Jesus tells us that in the New Testament, right? And all he's doing is teaching what the Old Testament taught. Now, it's my belief when God made Adam and Eve that, and he created Eve from that rib, that God was showing that for each person on earth, even though he's not making us in the same way that he made Adam and Eve for each other, and they became one flesh. Remember, they were one. Adam was not one by himself. Eve was not, well, I guess he was one by himself. Eve was one by herself, but together they became one flesh. And I guess the idea of one flesh, I don't think the Bible actually says if you're by yourself, you're one flesh. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But anyways, here's a question for you. Can a man be one without the person that God created for him? Does God have a partner for everyone? I believe he does. And I think that we do is the same thing that happened here, where the sons of God went in and married worldly women. And it was a downfall of a lot of men. And that's a downfall for us today. When we have these marriages, it's a stepping stone into getting hooked in pornography and masturbation. And we're going to get further into this, and we're going to see this from just a common sense perspective, as well as some Bible, because this is a Bible study too. So I'm going to have some Bible here. But I'm not going to do it in the same way as anybody else. At least I don't think so. Mine would just be different. And one of the reasons why this is a hard subject to talk about and a hard subject to deal with and a hard subject to prove is because the Bible doesn't seem to be super clear on it. It is clear, don't get me wrong, it does actually talk about it. But where it gets hard is because it's hard to attribute sin when you can put a face on it, right? So you're masturbating, but you're masturbating and you have a face in your mind. Now, there might be some people that are so hooked on it that they don't ever picture a face, and it's just solely about the gratification of self. But in general, you're not looking at pornography if that's the reason for it. It's because when you first see a picture of pornography, it gets you. And then you look and you look, and this is what happened to me. You'd think you'd be online for an hour, and 5 or 6 hours have passed, and you're like, where did the time go? It's like you're dead, and the time is just completely gone. It's wasted, and you have no idea how it happened. And you just feel horrible about the amount of time that you just wasted. And while it was pleasurable for that amount of time, you didn't get the pleasure you were seeking until near the very end, which lasts for a man like what, 15, 20 seconds? Maybe it lasts longer for a woman. I don't know how long it lasts for a woman. I'm not even sure how long it lasts for a man because I don't really pay attention to that. But once the deed is done, then all of a sudden you have that high and then you come up and you got that low. And we often attribute that low like this relaxed feeling, but it's a little bit low. And if anybody's actually watching this video, it's probably because they have that shame and guilt that comes along with it. And they know that they did something wrong. It's our conscience speaking to us. God put a conscience in us and it speaks to us. And while we can kill that conscience and develop an evil conscience, in general, most people know that this is wrong. Shucks, you can just look at TV and movies, right? If it's not listed as E for everyone, then it's G. And G means that if a man has a shirt off, that it's not appropriate for all audiences. Can you imagine that? A man without a shirt is not appropriate. Even the world understands modesty better than we do. We go to a beach, and what do we have? It's not modest, especially today. So now, as I talk about this, I want to talk about this especially for the men that are stuck in this while they're married. And you're like, why am I hooked on this? Why am I stuck on this? Does the Bible not say it's better to be married than to burn? So, I married and I'm still hooked on this and I can't get over this. What is going on? Why am I still going to burn? Because, if you're doing this, you're not going to heaven, right? You're going to burn in hell. Plain and simple. It's just what it is. And you know it. That's why we're here. And that's why people want to understand, how can I overcome this? Well, the Bible tells us, my people die for lack of knowledge. So it's not understanding why you're doing this, why you're hooked on it, is the reason why you can't overcome. And by having the tools you need to overcome is understanding why. That's what gives you the tools as to why you can't get over this and why you're having an issue with it. You can't give something to God that you don't really understand. Right? If you're hooked on drugs, God, I'm hooked on cocaine. I like the cocaine because I'm depressed and I take it to forget all my troubles. But oh God, I don't want to forget my troubles anymore. I want to give it all to you. And then God can help you with that and take it away. But how can you do that with pornography if you're like, I don't know why I do it? I'm stuck. I can't help myself. I just keep finding myself back into it. And for all of us, we know that when it comes to doing it, it's not that hard to fall back into. It's just a simple thought of, oh, I'm just going to do it. Isn't that how it happens? It's not like you're beating yourself up. You might be wrestling in your mind, but when you give in, it's because why? You haven't repented of the sin because you don't even know how to repent of it. And God's got to put it into your heart of how to repent of it to see what's causing these root sins. And that's the thing with a lot of sin is if you don't understand the root cause of it, why do I get angry? Why do all these things happen? If you can't go back and get the root out, that sin will always keep coming back. So today I want us to get the root of this sin out so we can all overcome. Now, don't get me wrong. Uh, this is just like alcohol and it's like cocaine and it's like all the other drugs. You might overcome for a time and you'll go back into it. And we got to pray for you and we'll keep on praying for you because it's one of those things where you can be overcome in a temptation. This is how Ellen White will say it. When things get so bad that you just want to give up on everything, including God, and you become overcome and then you step into sin. And it's because you're giving up on God, you're hiding on God that you step back into these sins, right? In what is it, 1 Corinthians 10:16 or 6? So I don't know. But anyways, there's no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with that temptation also make a way of escape. So for myself, this is a video that I'm doing in relation to an earlier video, which was called How Christianity Has Accepted Polygamy Through Divorce. Okay, so we're talking about polygamy now, masturbation and pornography. This is polygamy and you don't even know it. So this is in response to that video where I'm going into detail, and I said I'd talk about this later on. And we're going to dig into the roots of why these things actually are. So in that video, we learn and we find out from the Bible alone what a marriage is. And a marriage is when the first person that you actually go in and you actually have physical intercourse with. That is a marriage. It has nothing to do with going to a ceremony and having a piece of paper on a wall, right? Because if you get married, you're not considered married and you can opt out of that and get a divorce without even a blink of an eye if the marriage has never been consummated. The world even knows that if you don't consummate it, you're not actually married. A marriage is the consummation. So we're bringing this back to marriage. So how many people here are married and are stuck in the sin? Probably almost everyone, right? I just blanket stating it, and that's probably what it is because that's what the statistics show. Did you know that statistics show? Now, get this, this is people that admit to this, okay? So, how many people are conspiracy theorists and are like, I'll never tell the truth because somebody's going to use that against me someday? Well, that's like, what, 30 or 40% of the population, right? That aren't going to admit it. But now let's see what these stats say. 78% of people admit to having masturbated at least once or on a continued basis in their life. So 78, right? Okay, how many conspiracy theorists? Let's jump that number way up. 14% of people admit to doing it at work, right? Okay, let's jump that way up. 12% of women over the age of 70 admit to this practice. Wow. Now, even the people that do these polls say that they know that the average, due to statistics, means that the average people, instead of being 78% of people, would actually be 90 at least. And one of the worst parts about this sin is that how can you hate somebody or hate a sin that has a face on it? And this is the problem with this sin, is because when you go into this sin, it's always attached to a face. Now, sometimes some of these sites will blur out the face. And they do that for a reason too, because then you imagine a face in that face. So think about this. For all you people that are hooked on this, this is why we're here. This is why we're talking about this, is because we have this problem, right? I had this problem. I don't have this problem now. So let me go through a little experience of how I realized that we put a face in there. So I was married, and my wife and I were going through a really tough time. And we hadn't had intimacy in a while. And she was gone for a little bit. I think she was gone for maybe a week or so. She was gone somewhere else. A week or two. I guess it was 2 weeks. She would have been gone for 2 weeks. And because we hadn't had that intimacy and things were really bad, I caved. I went 8 years without falling for this sin. And I caved. And I was completely faithful to my wife. And you might say, well, how can you be completely faithful to your wife if you cave? Well, this was the thing, because we didn't have that physical relationship and intimacy anymore. And I desired to have this physical intimacy and relationship with her. One of the reasons being is this physical intimacy felt for me, and I don't know how it is for most men, but for me, whenever I would have this intimacy, it's like, this is all my love. This is everything I can give you. That height of ecstasy is like all the feelings you can have put into one, and you feel like you're giving it to that person and sharing it with this person and making it this absolute intimate moment that's just between you and her. And it's so precious to you. So whenever I would go into the pornography, and all of a sudden, and I was stuck in this for a week, right? And at this time, all of a sudden, I thought, God is not making a way of an escape. Here I go. I am into the sin, and God is not making a way of escape for me anymore. And remember how I just talked about that one verse in the Bible that says God will always make a way of escape? Well, here I found myself in a position where there wasn't one of the kids knocking at the door. There wasn't the telephone ringing. There wasn't some funny noise outside or something happening, the house creaking in a funny way, something to take your mind off of it for a second to all of a sudden make you go, oh, this is God making a way of escape. I had nothing. But little did I know, God was putting that in my mind. You're thinking that I've made no way of escape. This is my way of escape for you. And I had no idea. But here I am. I'm looking, and I'd spend hours on the internet searching and searching and searching and searching, right? How many of you do that? You're on the internet and you don't even really fully understand what you're looking for, but you're looking for something in particular, something really specific, and you're spending hours and hours and hours, and then you finally find something that may satisfy, may not satisfy. You have your moment and it's done and over with. But for me, it was not the person that I'd be looking at. As soon as when I start getting to that moment, boom, that image would be gone and I would only think of my wife. So even in doing this, I was being faithful to my wife, but I was being unfaithful to God and unfaithful to my wife at the same time because I'm degrading her and not even understanding it. Because if I'm doing this in my mind with her, this is without her consent. And if this is without her consent, it's not any real different than rape, right? Now you might say, well, you can't really rape your wife because rape, but God, God says we should be able to handle our vessels with honor. He does not endorse anything that is forced on anyone. God doesn't force us to love him. God doesn't force us to obey him. He's like, this is the result of what will happen. So even though I was doing this in my mind, I was defiling her and I didn't realize this. Now, like I said earlier, this is based on a previous video. So in my previous video, I had talked about how that my wife wasn't actually my wife and that the very first person that I was with was my wife. So interestingly enough, after I divorced my wife and after we're fully through a divorce and she's married to somebody else now, which means the Bible says she can never come back to me, then I finally fully realized everything about marriage and divorce. And realize that this other person is actually my wife in God's eyes, even though we never technically married in the world's eyes. In God's eyes, we were married. I could never think of her in that way. I could never put her face into those situations. And while I might think she's attractive and be super drawn to her, when it came to the pornography, I could not do this. The Bible says, what man ever hated his own flesh, right? For two saith he shall become one flesh. She was one flesh. So if I were to do this without her consent, even if it was only in my mind, I'd be defiling her, which would mean I would hate my own flesh. So here's a little something for people to think about. Is there somebody you cannot think about? And did she happen to be the very first person you were ever with physically that you can never put in your mind because it just doesn't feel right? Just thinking about that. Now, there is going to be more added to that might not actually happen to you, and we're going to go through those reasons why too. And that's still something else. Like we're going to take it right down to the bare roots, because if that's not your problem, we're going to take it to the root before that root. So, one of the reasons that you can have this problem is because it can be hereditary too. If both your parents, especially if both your parents have a real strong, sinful, lustful desire that happens like this, it's part of your blood, right? It fevers your blood. Drugs and those things fever and do things to your blood. It fevers the blood, right? Ellen White will talk about that all the time. All these things that fever the blood. So does lust. And when you do this, right? Whenever somebody's a cocaine addict and they have a child, and that child's like addicted to cocaine when they're born. So it is when you have that up and down feeling, that's based on lust. This can be also transferred to your children, which predisposes them to be more apt to fall into these sins. So for me, I wish my parents were still alive today. I'd love to ask my dad or my mom if they ever had problems with this. I don't know if they did or not. I haven't the foggiest clue. And to me, I don't think that they did, but I have all these innocent thoughts of my parents. They might have when they were younger, when they had me, because they weren't walking with God in the same way as they were, 5 years after I was born. 5 years after I was born, my parents took faith so seriously. It was a whole different story. So I might have been a little bit predisposed to it. You might have been a little bit predisposed to it, but that's still no excuse for sin. So the Bible talks about by beholding, you become changed. So one of the things that really changes our mindset is TV and movies. TV and movies, one, it leads to immodesty. Most shows have immodesty. Modesty in the Bible is something completely foreign to us that we have no idea about today. Most people don't even know what modesty is anymore. And it's not just about women wearing dresses, it's about how much you're clothed. Did you know that before, I think it was 1911 or 1913, that no man wore short sleeves? They all wore long sleeves. It wasn't until that there was some people in the military that were in a really hot climate that they started going down to their undershirts and being in their undershirts, and it became a popular fad and took off to what we have today in a society where we're all naked. But I don't want to get into that deeply. I do have a video, it's called Why I Dress the Way I Do, and I'm going to do a better video on it later because that has terrible sound, terrible picture, and I'm going to do a better one. But think about this too. So all of a sudden we have a desensitizing, right? Even in a lot of our professions, we have nurses and doctors, and we have all these different people that work with people that are not necessarily clothed, right? You have swimming pools where people come and they're not clothed, and we become desensitized to it. And a lot of nurses, and this is always something that troubles me, is when a nurse or a doctor says, well, I'm desensitized to it. It doesn't matter. I've seen it all. And it's like, no, 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 no. You cannot be desensitized to modesty. You become desensitized to sin, and then you accept sin. That's what you're doing. You're working with a man and you're a woman. It's because you're desensitized to sin. If you sort of step back and look at them and think from their perspective, oh, this person, here I am, I have my shirt off, right? Okay, I'm a man. If I have my shirt off, okay, if I'm a little bit overweight, I do feel, a little bit shameful, and I feel like I'm not covered properly, and I'm afraid that somebody's gonna be like whenever we start having those thoughts, we should honestly, realize that this desensitization is to the sin and how we're actually making other people feel. And it's not to a desensitization to modesty. And then another thing that entraps us in this, and this is why the Bible says, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things, if you're familiar with the verse in, I think it's Philippians, um, by beholding we become changed. So if we're always in our Bible, all these things will start coming back to us, and a modesty will start coming back to our minds, and then we'll start hating these things. But as long as we live in the world and we don't always think on those things, if we watch TV, if we watch sports, just think about the actors and the sports stars that we like and all these different people, and how they're not dressed in a modest manner or how they have inappropriate acts that we watch. Just think about a love scene in a movie or on TV, right? All of a sudden, we're invited right into their bedroom or into an area like that should be something that's just between two people alone. And all of a sudden, the intimacy is gone, the modesty is gone, and we find ourselves in a spot where we're entertaining sin. How can we even watch these things? If we're a Christian, can you watch those things? Can we entertain sin being in a place where somebody is in a personal, private moment and we're being partakers of it? Like, is that right? No, it's not right. Okay, so let's start understanding this in a little bit deeper level. Where I'm going to take you through 3 Bible verses, take it to a deeper level, and then I'm just going to take it to a completely personal level for a while. So in Deuteronomy 22, verse 28, it says, if a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay a hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her, he may not put her away all his days. Okay, so here's a Bible verse that's clearly showing that it doesn't matter the paper that you have, whether you're married or not. What really matters is that the two of you came in and became one flesh. They're to be married. They're never to be separated all his days. Now, this is one of the hardest verses in the Bible for people to understand. But the thing is the Bible says you must love your enemy. So this woman would go to hell if she didn't love this man that just raped her. So they got to be married. And this man, he can't go and be with anyone else again, right? He has to be faithful unto her. He has to fulfill his wedding vows. And if he doesn't turn his life to God and he goes and bees with somebody else, that would be adultery, which means he needs to be put to death, right? So this woman has to forgive him. And by forgiving him, she can convert him so that he can love God. So understanding this, that a marriage is when two become one flesh, this is critical for understanding part of the reason why we get stuck in the sin. Okay, now let's read another Bible verse and we're going to see something. In Matthew 5:27, it says, "Ye have heard that it was said of by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart already." How many times have you heard a man, you've been with a group of men and a pretty girl goes by and they're like, oh, look at her, look at her, look at her, and they might say something, right? Okay. How many of them, they're like, well, I'm just looking, but I'm not actually touching. Well, the Bible's here actually teaching, what you've already thought in your mind, you've already done in your heart, and it actually says you've committed adultery with her. Okay. So for all the married men that do that, you've just committed adultery. It doesn't say that she has to be married, right? You just have to be married. And if you have those thoughts, you've committed adultery. But it also doesn't say that it's just a married man. So a man that he was even not married that just looks on a woman and has those thoughts has committed adultery. How can that be? Because if you're not betrothed to somebody, or she might be betrothed to somebody you don't know, she might be married to somebody and you don't know. But if God has designed a wife for you and you haven't sought her out and found her yet, okay, and if you're looking on another person, are you not committing adultery against the person that God has made for you? Okay, this is getting to like the deepest root that we're going to get, right? If God has created somebody for you to be one flesh with you, anything outside of that, any thoughts about another woman outside of that is just adultery. And then when we do that, we've committed sin. And the thing with sin is that every time you sin becomes less and less sinful in your own eyes. And this is why it says in Exodus 20, verse 17, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his maid servant, nor his manservant, nor his maid servant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's." Did you notice? It said wife, but it also said two other things: his manservant or his maidservant, right? To covet after something is to lust after something. So even to lust after something, now this is from the Bible, this is from the Ten Commandments, is sin. When we go into a relationship, into a marriage, God wants it to be with the person that he's chosen for us. It cannot be with lust. It should not ever be with lust. It should be an open, intelligent affirmation of coming together and then developing of these desires for each other. Because each man, the Bible tells us, is even supposed to be in control of his own vessel. So to covet, to lust after someone else, is sin, even your own wife. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of my personal experience. And this is where it gets super uncomfortable for me. Because I'm going to talk about things that I've never shared before. I'm going to talk about things that I don't share with people before. But now that I see how prevalent it all is in society, I think I should openly talk about it. And I'm doing it because I am a teacher. Here I am. I'm a minister of the gospel. There's no doubt about it. This is where I am. I'm teaching, I'm ministering, I'm teaching people how to overcome sin, how to read and study their Bibles, to have an experience with Christ. And so we're going to do this, and I'm going to show you from my own experience, my trials and challenges through my life, where I failed, and why this sin had me hooked for years. So this is a not so proud history for me. So one of my first experiences with not even pornography, not masturbation, I was way too young for that, but my first experience into delving into this world was I was 5 years old, and I had an aunt come over and stay with us at one time. And while she was staying with us, during our nap time, because my brother and I still had to have naps, I guess it would be on a Sunday. On Sundays, we'd all have naps. And I was banished up to the attic. And there was a bed up in the attic, and that's where I would have my nap. I wasn't allowed to be with my brother because middle of the day, as if two kids are going to sleep if they're in a room together by themselves. So I was banished to the attic. But this is where my aunt was staying. So I think she thought I was asleep. And what she didn't realize is that I was still awake. And she decided to change. And all of a sudden, she had her top off. And there she was right in front of me, topless. And that is a vision that has been imprinted in my mind. And I can still see clear as a bell today. Clear as a bell today. I won't say which aunt it is. And if my aunt remembers this, I remember that incident. But anyways, so that was my first step into, whoa, she's a lot different than I look. And then we're in school. So in school, I would have been grade 1 or 2. Now I went to a public school. I wasn't in a Christian school. And I'll never forget. All of a sudden, one time, I think I only went and looked at it once, maybe twice, because I was curious. All of a sudden, a bunch of kids were gathered around this one spot. And one of the boys there had a pornographic magazine. So I'm like, so I was grade 1, so that would have been like 7 years old, 6, 7 years old. And he'd shoved it up this one pipe, and he kept it at the school, this pornographic magazine, and he showed people the pictures. And I think it was Playboy. Now, Playboy back at that time was not like the pornographic magazines today, I think. Actually, I don't know what a pornographic magazine is like today, so praise God for that. But it didn't show the actual intercourse. It was just like women that had no clothes on. So all of a sudden, that put something in my mind, and I'm like, wow, they look quite a bit different than what we do. And I'll never forget, uh, there's this one girl, and I'd get together with her every so often. She was actually like a family friend, and she was about the same age as me. And I don't know how we got into the topic, but it'd be like, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine, and it's more one of those innocent like things at that time because, you're learning. And we did that. But, we didn't like show like for very long or whatever. It was probably one of those quick peeps, and you just know you're doing something wrong. So you don't do it for very long. And off you go in kind of innocency, but it's still not innocent because you just did something that was wrong, even if we didn't fully understand it. But as time goes by, it starts becoming more and more understandable. So around grade 4, I think it was probably around grade 4, all of a sudden, I guess maybe it was grade 6. Grade 6 must have been when it was first introduced because it was at this time when sex education was introduced. They went and they showed us all kinds of pictures and diagrams, and there wasn't like there was like photographs or anything like that, but they had all these diagrams trying to teach us about sex. And I remember going, something doesn't make sense to me because it kept on talking about this stuff coming out of me and going into this woman, and I couldn't fathom how it worked because it kept on talking about, well, I'll just say it this way. A man has a little hole that he pees out of. It's only like, this big. Okay. And the thing that I used to pee out of, I'm picturing the same spot on a woman being this big, like nothing can go into it. It hurts when you touch it. And I'm picturing something the exact same size on a woman. And I'm like, how does my vessel get inside of there? And I was totally bewildered. And I wrote question after, because they're like, you can write questions and we'll answer them. And I wrote question after question after question them, but the same question every time. And they could never answer because I don't think they fully understood what I was trying to say and what I had pictured in my mind. So they couldn't answer it. So this left me in a state going, I don't know. This had me so mind boggled. I'm like, I need to know how that works now. Here they're teaching us. And I felt dumb because everybody else understood and I didn't understand. I'm like, why am I so dumb? Why can't I understand it if everybody else gets it? More water. I'll be back. And that was my first step down the trail to sin. And this leads to one of the most embarrassing and shameful moments of my life. I was only 12 years old, and I had this burning question in my mind that I needed to understand and figure out. So, this came to a situation where all of a sudden I was somewhere where there's this person sleeping of the opposite gender. And I thought, I'm going to feel around there and see if I can figure it out while they're sleeping. And I didn't even think that they're going to wake up. I don't even know why I didn't think that they'd wake up, but I thought, oh, if I do it really lightly and don't do anything, they'll just stay asleep and I'll figure this mystery out. Well, let me tell you, they woke up. And let me tell you, my dad confronted me. My dad didn't spank me. That was one of those moments, my dad knew this was not a spanking moment. But he let me know that if I was 16, I would be out of the house without a question. There was no ands, ifs, buts, or even asking. You'd just be gone. He let me know so emphatically how wrong what I did was that I wasn't ever going back down that road again. But I still didn't have my question answered. And I'd started on that path of doing things that I shouldn't be doing. Because essentially, 12 years old, I committed sexual assault. And a lot of people today might listen to this and be like going, oh, you know. And at 12 years old, you're held accountable for a lot of the things that you do. Just what it is. So this person that I did this to, we're fine and we have peace about it. But let me tell you, it's still to this day, God has forgiven me. I don't feel the shame of it anymore. But when I think about it, the sorrow of what I did to them really bothers me. So, 12 years old and I'm older and, I'm going through life and all of a sudden, I grew up in a good Christian household. We weren't part of the world. We didn't listen to any rock music. We didn't listen to the radio. The only thing we listened to was Christian stuff. My parents would have the TV on, but we only listened to like I don't even remember at that time what we actually watched or listened to. Uh, but I'd go to school and all of a sudden I'd hear kids singing songs like there's this one song where it was like boom boom boom. If anybody remembers that song, and for me that was still a mystery. I'm like, what in the world? All these kids are singing this. It's this big, it's this famous, but it's popular song, and it had this catchy rhythm to it. And here I am, still young, still not understanding how all these things work, still feeling dumb because I don't understand all these things. And they're singing songs about this as if it's this great and glorious thing. And I couldn't fathom why. And this is where living in the country really helps. Being near farms, being around these different things, is that in the country, you can see these things being worked out in nature, and it gives you a very good idea how all these things work. If I would have lived on the farm, I would have seen these things. I'd go visit my aunts and uncles at these farms, but I didn't see what was actually happening when animals would mate. So now during this time, I've been all the way through puberty. I'm starting to have these desires for women and I'm starting to take a look and an interest at women. And all of a sudden I find myself noticing things like come spring, so different today than it was back in the day. So back in the day when I was in school, all of a sudden you'd see an ankle because sometimes people might wear sandals to school, so they didn't have socks on, and all of a sudden you'd see an ankle and your heart would go putter putter putter. And people weren't completely were completely clothed at that time. And it's like, okay, I'm starting to have this desire for women now. They're not just the opposite sex that little boys seem to have no desire for and usually pick on and make fun of. All of a sudden now, if you're making fun of them, it's usually because you like them. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting a little bit older, and all of a sudden I get into, I guess I was probably about 15 years old, and all of a sudden we had a sleepover one time, and somebody says, "Hey, let's turn on the TV late at night and let's watch this. Let's see what's on." And when we turned on the TV, all of a sudden this one show came up. And this one show was probably the biggest corrupting show for me. It was the Benny Hill show. If anybody's familiar with that show, it was quite, to me, I think it's degrading to women. And it just exploits the bodies of people instead of what the people actually are. And I guess maybe it was, I don't even know, I haven't watched the show, so maybe it was kind of like a spoof show on it or whatever. But it showed women and it showed a lot of things that it probably shouldn't have shown, and that kids, 15 years old, I still consider myself a kid, probably should not have seen. As an adult, I think we should not see. So, right? Anything that you think a child shouldn't watch is probably something you shouldn't watch. because there's a reason why you think they shouldn't watch it. So after seeing this show, all of a sudden, I started understanding a little bit more about masturbation. And then all of a sudden, that became a real problem for me. So I'm 15 years old, and that's becoming a problem. So I'm getting a little bit older. Now I'm going to parties and I'm going to bars, and women are dancing and things are moving about. They're wearing tight clothes and you can see down their tops, you can see up their skirts, you can see whatever. And all of a sudden you're going down that road. And by beholding, we become changed. And as we become changed, that grip on us for the pornography and the masturbation becomes stronger and stronger. But remember, we still got to understand this root more and more. Why are these desires? Why do we have all these desires? And yes, a lot of it is a natural desire into us, but it's not a natural desire for that. It's not a natural desire for the sex that we're actually craving. The natural desire we're actually craving is to be one flesh with somebody. It's that missing partner that we don't have, the proper partner that we don't have, that we're trying to fill that hole with. So I get a little bit older. And next thing you know it, I found myself at a strip club. I think I went 3 or 4 times to a strip club. I was out with somebody and they're like, hey, we're just going here. And, I'm with them. I have to go with them. Or I could have stayed in the car. And because I wasn't a Christian at the time, I just went in with them. And then I think there's 2 or 3 times where I actually went with people just because they all decided they're going there. And that is what we did. But I never felt really right in these clubs. And I remember I was even asked to be a bouncer. But I'm like, no, no, that wasn't for me. I wasn't going to be a bouncer. So even in a regular club, no, I wasn't going to be a bouncer. So move further along again. And all of a sudden, after being at a strip club, this really desensitizes you to it, because all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of men gathered around together, right? So the intimacy of marriage is completely gone. And then you're like looking at this woman who's like doing all these things, and there's nothing personal about it. So the personalization is taken out of it, the intimacy is out of it, and everything is left up to your own imagination. So while you're trying to fill these holes, you're doing it in a place where you can never ever fill this hole. You can never ever be satisfied, but you keep on going back because you have this desire to be one flesh with somebody, and you're trying to fill it, and you see this person up there which you're imagining yourself being one flesh with. There's no reason to be there if you're not imagining that when she's doing all these things. And from there it gets even worse because you're so desensitized to it. You're around with all these men. I had friends that had been part of orgies where it was multiple people all together doing different things. And then the thought came to me as well, shucks, if you just put a bag on somebody's head, you couldn't tell if they're a male or a female for half the things that they did. And that is the truth of the matter, right? So it starts small, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, it gets even bigger than that. So further on in time, I'm looking at this now and I'm remembering, okay, I'm going to this because this is a sin that is actually prevalent in society today. It's kind of scary at how much it actually is. And I want to talk about bestiality. So people are like, bestiality. Well, we just had something that happened here in Canada where there was like this whole ring all over the world dealing with bestiality. So when I was in high school, I'll never forget, I didn't see it, but all my friends talked about watching this one video that had bestiality. And this video made the rounds, I guess, through my school. And I'm like, why would you even watch that? But as I got further and further into the sin, I understood why they watched it. And while they'd laugh and make fun of it and stuff like that, uh, they don't understand how people can really get involved in that. And maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm just saying that. But what I do remember, I got to the point where I was so far away that I'm like, you know what? I might have actually entertained that at one time if I was in a place where I could have. And I'm thank God that I wasn't in a place where I was able to do that. But I'll never forget, I'd go to my uncle's farms and the calves, they'd often come up to you and we'd always think it was funny, they'd grab one or two of your fingers because they're just baby calves and they'd suck on them, right? They're looking for their mother, and for whatever reason, cows like to come up and they like to grab your fingers and suck on your fingers. And I'll never forget when I got so far depraved in my mindset that I would think, you know what? That would feel really good, even from a cow, right? If I were to do that, I'm like, and this is where the mindset takes us. This is why when the Israelites went into the land of Canaan, that they were supposed to destroy all the people in the land of Canaan, the promised land, is because the Bible actually says they were participating in bestiality, right? Think of the diseases that were going through the men, the women, and the children and the animals, that all of it needed to be killed in some of those communities, right? We look at what happens today when we have, you know, just viruses crossing over from humans to adults. But can you imagine if this was openly being done in communities? So when you come down and you see yourself at this point, you realize that we need healing on the inside. The reason why we're doing it, one, is the God hole. We have a hole that God has not filled. As long as we have these thoughts, Christ cannot abide in us, right? Christ cannot abide in the heart of a sinner. So if we have these thoughts, Christ does not abide in us. One. So that leaves a big hole that we're trying to fill. Two, if God had a plan and a purpose for us to be with somebody and we chose not to walk in that path or in that purpose, then we have that hole to fill as well. And this is why in 1 John 2 verse 16 it says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." So this is all happening because we lust after the world. We're lusting after the worldly flesh. We're trying to fill the hole that God needs to fill, right? Because it says this is not of the Father, but this is of the world, because we're putting the world into us because we're missing the Father. And this is where we need to accept Jesus in our hearts by faith. We need to have the faith that God can fill this hole, that He can fill that void that's there and help us overcome the world, overcome these things. And we can realize that, hey, God, if you made a specific person for me, right? Especially like if you haven't walked into these sins yet, if you made a specific person for me, if I'm doing these things, I am sinning against the person that you have made for me. I am committing adultery against her already. We need to understand the sinfulness of this sin in order for us to hate the sin, right? To have the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. And this is evil, to be committing adultery against someone, right? Even if you're even thinking about the person that God has set up for you, you're doing it through lust and you're doing it in violation of her, right? You're doing it without her consent, even if it's only in your mind, which would be the same as rape. Now, something else I want to talk about too, like part of the reason for people in marriage relationships, right? Let's take it back to a marriage relationship. If you're in a marriage relationship and you're struggling with your intimacy between your wife, well, one, it could be she was not meant to be your wife, right? She might have been a woman of the world. And because she's a woman of the world, you still are bound to her. You cannot divorce her. And you just have to love her with the love that you have. But because of all the things that I talked about earlier, right, by following the world, say like watching TVs and movies and sports, where all of a sudden we can idolize different people, people become fans of different people, right? So think about all the movie stars and all the people that people look at and go, oh, they're amazing. Why are you looking at them as amazing? What is it that you see in them that doesn't that satisfies you more than with your own spouse? Why would you look at them and put them on a pedestal when your wife should be on a pedestal higher than them, and everything that they do should never really come into existence in your mind? You should never say, oh, and talk about their beauty, because beauty, what does they say? Beauty is only skin deep. Is that what they say? uh Beauty is on the inside. More beautiful somebody is on the inside, is the more beautiful they are to you, even on the outside. It doesn't matter if they weigh a lot, if they, whatever problems they might have. When you have that true love of somebody in the inside, the love that God wants us to have, you don't see the outward appearances anymore. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of marriages fail, is because of TVs and movies and seeing these intimate scenes in TVs and movies. For me, one of the most hurtful things I've ever heard in my life, and it was actually from two people, and I only had three people in my life, was when they said, now I'll talk about this a little bit further on later too, is when they said, just make love to me, just make love to me. And in my mind, this is all I'm doing. This is the very act of it. This whole climax is me putting all my love into you. This is it. And after I do this, I go, oh, I just gave you all my love. But here they're saying, hey, just do this, just do this. And you're like, this is all I'm doing. But what do they have in their mind? For me, in my mind is like, what TV show did you watch? What movie did you watch? What actor did you watch? Which love scene did you watch that you equate to what making love is? We don't understand what making love is today anymore. And this is why we ache for it. And even though they asked for it, and even though they couldn't even give me an answer to what it actually was, and I didn't ask because I was just so ashamed that I couldn't fulfill this part for them, it could never be done because what they're asking for is something we can't actually give because we're just trying to fill this hole that's been made void and missing. And the only thing that can fill it is God. Now I want to take this to another level again. In Amos 2, it says, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes, that pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek. And the man and his father will go in unto the same maid to profane my holy name. Okay, so the part I want to focus on here is that a man and his father will go in unto the same maid. Do we not do that today with pornography? Right? Did Jesus not say that a man that looketh on a woman and lusteth after her has already committed this in his own mind? How many times have you been on the internet and you're surfing a picture? How many times have you seen that? How many times has that picture been looked at? Could your father or your children actually be looking at the same picture as you and doing the same thing, masturbating to that same picture as you? Right? Is this verse not fulfilled right there with the internet? And we profane the holy name of God because two saith he shall be one flesh, and a man should not go in unto his father's wife. Right? Just in every way, God is saying, no, this is wrong. Think about this too. Every time you find one of those pictures, if you do anything looking at one of those pictures, how many thousands, if not millions, if not billions of people have done that with that same person in mind? If that person were in the flesh in front of you and you knew that 1 billion people slept with her, would you want to sleep with her too? Or him? Right? It's not just a male thing, it's a female thing as well. Right? 1 billion people? 7 billion people? Who knows how many? It all depends on how old that picture is. And when we watch a lot of these videos, the things that people do that are not appropriate. Now, God made man distinct, not to be like animals. For a man to be in places that are unclean with his face, or a woman to be in places that are unclean with her face, is something that unclean animals do. Right? This is not something man's supposed to do. This is where you know you're fulfilling the lusts of the flesh and you're not fulfilling the faithfulness and love that God would have for us with a woman. So I want to take this, bring it around into a little bit deeper level again. And I want to see where sin starts coming full circle. And I want to talk about pedophilia. So pedophilia is a whole other case. It's not like it's a whole other case because one sin starts with one sin and leads to another. And we don't really seem to see this through the Bible. We see other sins in the Bible, and maybe there were some cases where people married younger people, right? We have a lot of guesses and speculations, and a lot of those guesses and speculations are just that, guesses and speculations. And often it's people fighting to try to disprove the Bible and argue the Bible and try to make it look evil. So people just lie and make up stuff and then count it as fact. But why do people go into pedophilia? Well, I want to take this kind of in a funny direction from a biblical standpoint of we want to be born again, right? Jesus promises when we're born again that we'll have new lives and that all those sins of our past life will be done away with. Well, is that not what we want to whenever we're trying to fill that God hole, we have sin trying to fill that God hole, but we know that things are not necessarily right and say if you have relationships with women or if you're married and things aren't really good, you'd like to go back and start things over and start things anew. And this is where I think the pedophilia comes in, is that when you have a younger person, they're always more submissive. They don't talk back to you. They don't argue with you. And I think that is where a lot of the pedophilia comes in, is that, a lot of these things started when we're younger. So when you're young, when you're a child, and all of a sudden you start thinking about women, and then the first women that are actually probably come into your mind, that is kind of where your forefront is, like your foundation is laid from that age. So if in your mind you're going back to that age and thinking about women at that age, your natural tendency will probably be to like women at that, well, they're not even women anymore, they're kids, because you're a kid when these things started happening. So this is not to justify pedophilia, but it's to see where this root of the pedophilia comes from. Where in your life did you first start wondering about this intimacy between two different people? Was it when you were really young? Is that why you want to go back to that age of when you were really young? Can it be that, if you're an older person and it didn't start until you're later, could it be just that you want somebody that is submissive, is not going to argue back, and, somebody that you think you can mold and shape to conform to your ideas and your will? And the worst part about that is because while you're still doing this in your mind, it's still the same as actually doing it in real life, because God says, if you think this about if you think about a woman in your mind, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So this is where some of these evils take us. And it's not a good thing. Like, it just seems to start in a small place and it grows and grows and grows and branches off into different branches. And it's a sin that is really hard to overcome. So instead of looking for the younger women, look for the new birth in your life. Jesus wants to come and give us power to overcome all these sins. And we need to understand the sinfulness of this sin. Because if you're even thinking about younger people, it's the same as forcing yourself on them. You're doing it without their consent. And that's how God's looking at it in your mind. So I want to take a quote from Ellen White, and I'm just going to leave it at the end of this quote with Ellen White. And I want you to see how she looks at this sin and the light she puts it in through all the things that I talked about. Think about how God looks at it and look at it, what she's saying, and understand the severeness and the consequences of this sin. A terrible picture of the condition of the world has been presented before me. Immorality everywhere abounds. Licentiousness is a special sin of this age. Never did vice lift up its deformed head with such boldness as now. Can you imagine if she lived in today's age? It's totally unbelievable compared to her day. She could never believe what she would see in our day. The people seem to be benumbed, and the lovers of virtue and true goodness are nearly discouraged by its boldness, strength, and prevalence. The iniquity which abounds is not merely confined to the unbeliever and the scoffer. Would that this were the case, but it is not so. Many men and women who profess the religion of Christ are guilty. Even some who profess to be looking for his appearing are no more prepared for that event than Satan himself. They are not cleansing themselves from all pollution. They have so long served their lust that it is natural for their thoughts to be impure and the imagination corrupt. It is impossible to cause their minds to dwell upon the pure and holy things as it would be to turn the course of the Niagara and send its waters pouring up the falls. Youth and children of both sexes engage in moral pollution and practice this disgusting soul and body destroying vice. Many professed Christians are so benumbed by the same practice that their moral sensibilities cannot be aroused to understand that it is sin, and that if continued, its sure results will be utter shipwreck of body and mind. Man, the noblest being upon the earth, formed in the image of God, transforms himself into a beast. He makes himself gross and corrupt. Every Christian will have to learn to restrain his passion and be controlled by principle. Unless he does this, he is unworthy of the Christian name. Some who make a high profession do not understand the sin of self abuse and its sure results. Long established habit has blinded their understanding. They do not realize the exceeding sinfulness of this degrading sin, which is enervating the system and destroying the brain nerve power. Moral principle is exceedingly weak when it conflicts with established habit. Solemn messages from heaven cannot forcibly impress the heart that is not fortified against indulgence of this degraded vice. The sensitive nerves of the brain have lost their healthy tone by morbid excitation to gratify the unnatural desire for sensual indulgence. The brain nerves, which communicate with the entire system, are the only medium through which heaven can communicate to man and affect his innermost life. Whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric currents in the nervous system lessens and strengthens vital powers, and the result is a deadening of the sensibilities of the mind. In consideration of these facts, how important that ministers and people who profess godliness should stand forth clear and untainted from this soul debasing vice. She says in another spot, I believe she read it, and it's one of those things that it came to my realization where I was working and all of a sudden I started getting really forgetful. My short term memory was disappearing, and I still struggle with short term memory now. And to be able to attain a focus, and she says it is directly caused by some of these debasing vices, such as this masturbation, causes that. So I realize it in my life now. And as I struggle to regain my memory, which it's coming back, but let me tell you, it's not easy. When you go into those sins and you see the sure result of those sins and you see being fulfilled what was said from Ellen White in these sins, how many of you struggle with this? How many of you have a short term memory? So it's my prayer that we can find the root in our lives. And if we don't know where the root is in our lives, pray and ask God. Say there's a root to this problem. And if I don't know where this root is, oh God, please help me to find it or take it away from me. And God will. God is faithful. God is willing. As long as you have a sincere desire to weed out that root, God will be with you.